Good evening and welcome. There is a lot happening in the United States. It's all very important for the course of India-US equations. Prime Minister Modi is meeting the US President Joe Biden today at the White House. That's going to start in a little while from now. We'll cut across for footage from Washington in just a little while from now. Now, this will be the first in-person meeting between the two leaders after Mr. Biden became president in January. Prime Minister Modi will also attend the Quad Summit tonight. So back-to-back meetings. First, the meeting with President Biden and then the Quad Summit meeting with the Prime Ministers of Australia, Japan and the President of the United States also there. That's the agenda as far as this evening is concerned. Now, after his bilateral talks with President Biden, as I mentioned, the Prime Minister will be attending the first in-person Quad Summit. It's hosted by the US President, the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison, the Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga. They're also there. The Quad Summit aims to boost cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region amidst China's growing dominance in the area. Now, the Quad countries, Australia, India, Japan and the US, will announce a new working group on space, a supply chain initiative and a 5G deployment and diversification effort, apart from discussing issues like challenges in the Indo-Pacific. But perhaps the bigger question that needs to be asked, what is the real relevance of the Quad right now with the United Kingdom, Australia and the US having formed a security alliance? India has security concerns as far as China is concerned. Does the Quad address that very directly? Well, we've got footage there coming in. We're going to cut across to that. Prime Minister Modi at the White House. He'll be exiting that vehicle in just a few moments from now and heading on up to meet the US President, his first in-person bilateral meeting. Let's try and listen in. All right, the Prime Minister going in over there to the White House. And those talks with President Biden will be starting in a little while from now. Very, very important talks between India and the United States. It's not the first time that Prime Minister Modi has met the US President. They'd met several years earlier as well, but this is the first in-person meeting. It's important at a time when the world has faced a historical series of problems, the biggest being, of course, COVID. The situation in Afghanistan is something that needs to be looked at very closely. Members of the Indian delegation over there. I spotted the Foreign Secretary. I spotted I believe the National Security Advisor as well, the Indian Ambassador to Washington. And so that meeting is now about to start. The Prime Minister of India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the White House now, as you can see over there, just repeating that footage once again as we see Prime Minister Modi going in over there for this all-important meeting. So what is this all about? What can we actually expect over here? This is what some of the expectations are and a little bit on the context of this meeting.
आपका उपराष्ट्रपति के नाते चुने जाना अपने आप में एक बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण घटना है, ऐतिहासिक घटना है.
India, of course, is a very important partner to the United States. Throughout our history, our nations have worked together, have stood together to make our world a safer and stronger world.
A much-anticipated meeting between a US Vice President who has proudly acknowledged her Indian roots and India's Prime Minister, the first such meeting since Harris took over. For India, the big takeaways of the meeting were conversations on the role of Pakistan and terrorism.
The Vice President suo motu referred to Pakistan's role in that regard and on the need to rein in and closely monitor Pakistan's support for such terrorist groups.
Significantly, the US Vice President also reiterated the overriding priority of her administration, the protection of democratic values and institutions. She is the third senior US leader to have made this reference in talks with India since the Biden administration took over. India interprets this as a positive mention.
As democracies around the world are under threat, it is imperative that we defend democratic principles and institutions within our respective countries and around the world.
The Vice President, I think, appreciated the fact that both of our countries represented large and successful democracies and that we needed to continue to work not only within our own countries but with other countries to promote the brand of democracy.
The focus now shifts to the big meetings today. The first bilateral between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi and the Quad Summit, where leaders of the US, Japan, India and Australia will meet. The meeting with the Quad comes just days after the UK, Australia and the US formed a security pact in the Asia-Pacific region with an eye on China. The key question, does that take away from the relevance of the Quad as a grouping? Ankita Mukherjee for NDTV.
Well, joining us now, Tyler Pager, White House correspondent of the Washington Post. Tyler, thanks very much for being with us. What's on the agenda in the talks between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And I think the two big issues today for this bilateral between the two leaders are, one, obviously the pandemic, and two, climate change. The pandemic obviously being the crisis that is besetting every nation in the world, and something where really requires international cooperation on vaccine production, on vaccine distribution. And obviously the US sees India as a key partner in trying to continue efforts to curb the pandemic. Number two being climate change. This is something where Biden has really put a lot of emphasis on in recent weeks. We saw him talk extensively about it at the United Nations General Assembly meeting, and something that he sees as important as a driver of international cooperation, as this is something that no one nation can tackle alone. And so I think those are two of the most pressing issues we'll see. But then more broadly, I think this is an opportunity for Biden to emphasize the increasing interest that the United States has in bolstering its alliances in the Indo-Pacific region. As you mentioned earlier, China is a growing geopolitical threat, and the United States wants to bolster its alliances to counter that threat.
What about Afghanistan?
Yeah, I'm sure Afghanistan is something that's bound to come up again. Obviously, the U.S. has made significant changes in its posture in Afghanistan, withdrawing all troops over the summer, and now Taliban control of the country. I think, again, this is something that is bound to be discussed with Prime Minister Modi and the Quad leaders, but that is not the top of the agenda for the United States at this juncture.
All right, Tyler, thanks very much for sharing those views, a look ahead really at what's going to happen. It's an important day because there's going to be that Quad meeting, which is also going to come up. We've got a great panel this evening. We're joined by Teresa Schaefer, a former US ambassador, somebody who knows the South Asia region inside out and the equations between America and the United States. Casey Singh, a former diplomat, also with us. We're also joined by Nisha Charya, presently an advisor to the Biden government on their infrastructure plan, and Suhasini Haider, the national editor and diplomatic affairs editor of the Hindu. Thank you all very much for being with us. Ambassador Schaefer, if I can just come to you first. I know we're going to be talking about the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden extensively, but I just wanted to ask you about the relevance of Quad in the present scenario, given the fact that we have a new security alliance between the United Kingdom, Australia, and the United States. There was a sense that Quad was headed towards becoming a security setup. Now, that's not going to happen. India has concerns with China. Therefore, what's Quad going to be all about?
I think it's important to remember that the US, Australia, and Britain were already linked by an alliance long before the submarine deal was even thought of. Now, they've given it a new set of alphabets, which seems to be the first step towards making something more important, or at least easier to refer to in print. But I think that when you think about South and Southeast Asia, this is a region where you don't have one preeminent security bond as you do in Western Europe and across the Atlantic with NATO. That doesn't exist, and the countries of the region are more comfortable with a larger number of somewhat smaller groupings that can develop their own personality and their own priorities.
Right.
And that's where the Quad comes in. The Quad is something the U.S. has been interested in for a long time, but only really got serious in the late Obama years after the so-called pivot to Asia. and Trump took it seriously, and Biden took it seriously. And there are not very many things about which you can find those three people all in agreement.
Suhasini, let me come to you next.
One of the bonds to bring the whole region together.
Suhasini, does India really need a Quad to be discussing issues related to COVID and disaster management with the United States and other partners?
Well, the understanding is that the underpinnings of the Quad remain maintaining a free and open Indo-Pacific. But there is no question that this new alliance, and as Ambassador Schaefer said, the surprise in this new announcement has been that it was not necessary. The US already has treaty alliances with both the UK and with Australia, could have announced any of these defense partnerships, security partnerships, bilaterally, trilaterally, in any other way. But the idea that they needed to make the announcement of this new alliance, that they needed to say it 1 week before the Quad, which is of course also discussing the Indo-Pacific, and the fact that they needed to keep it so secret that even a close partner like France was taken by surprise, seems to indicate that this is much more substantive than people perhaps realize right now. And therefore, the Quad then has to ask the question, is it going to essentially be a grouping of democracies discussing climate change, COVID, critical technologies, and so forth? I think there is that element to it. There's no question that the Quad has come a long way. This is the first ever in-person summit of the four Quad leaders. So that can't be something that is taken lightly. But I do agree with you that the new announcement has, in a sense, taken away the limelight and taken maybe a little bit of the security shine from what the Quad is expected to do.
Ambassador Singh, should India consider it a bit of a disappointment that we weren't included in this pact between the United Kingdom, Australia and the US? I know Japan's not been included either. But do you think that is essentially linked to American reluctance to transfer substantive nuclear military or any nuclear military technology to India, and that the premise of the security group is the transfer of nuclear technology?
Vishnu, we shouldn't look at it that way. Was India ready for it? We don't want to be an ally. And that's very simple. Therefore, I think the Americans realized, and I led the Indian delegation when the first meeting took place in 2007. And the rationale behind it was a meeting of democracies. The security element was an arm's length. Essentially, it was the soft power of four democracies which can expand, which frightened China. Because China is not only frightened by weapons, it's also frightened by the idea of democracy. And I think that is crucial to these four. And the second thing is, it also then adds on smart power, which is that you take on the vaccines. The Chinese have created this whole mess. They managed to get away because of WHO, laxity on the part of WHO. But you are going to be giving vaccines where the Chinese vaccines really haven't been very successful. And then comes in infrastructure, which is your response to Belt and Road. So all those are also required to wean countries away from China and make sure they don't join them. And then comes the arm's length military component, which is your naval exercises, Malabar, and so on and so forth. We invited Australia this time. But what has happened with the three-country, the AUKUS, what is called, is that by giving the nuclear submarine technology, they've upended the Chinese approach. The Chinese had their missiles, because of which they were threatening every US base which were within reach, whether in Japan or Guam or Philippines. Now, Australia is away from that. And Australia can also provide bases to Americans. And the nuclear submarines will be lurking far away from the Chinese mainland and remain submerged for weeks on end. And that is, I think, a very strong signal to China. So we have a combination of different groupings in which some of the countries will be common, but some of the countries cannot. We are not going to be an ally. Yeah. So obviously we cannot be in something like that. But at the same time, these are all building blocks of what the Americans are doing. And here emerging technologies come in. If we can build up the capacity on the chip side, the Chinese need the new generation chips. They are not self-reliant on that. So if India can step in there, so I think the Americans realize that you build a kind of a multi-storied approach to China, where you go after the economy, you go after They will not have easy access to technologies, and India becomes a competitor. And then you have hard power, which comes in through their allies, which India will not do. But over a period of time, maybe the gap between what India does and what these three countries do may narrow in the maritime domain.
One sec, Ambassador, I just want to read this tweet by the President Biden. Let's have that up full screen. He's just tweeted this. We've got some images of Prime Minister Modi walking in for talks as well. This morning, I'm hosting Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the White House for a bilateral meeting. I look forward to strengthening the deep ties between our two countries, working to uphold a free and open Indo-Pacific and tackling everything from COVID-19 to climate change. Nishacharya, let me come to you next. Do you essentially see Quad going forward as the diplomatic and the democratic arm of the security arrangement between Australia, the UK and the US?
So let me first say I'm speaking for myself here, even though I'm doing some advising for the administration. I actually think the Quad India is right now part of the Quad, but I don't think that that's defining the relationship with the United States. I think what we're seeing is really two questions being asked in Washington at large among serious policymakers. The first is to gauge India's willingness to participate. As the ambassador said, it doesn't want to be an ally. And so how far is it going to participate on U.S.-led initiatives? And how far can you bring India along, even if it's on things like COVID and climate change, where there's a lot of agreement in general about the need to do things. So I think that's the big question President Biden as president is sort of trying to gauge from Prime Minister Modi is how far along will India come as a partner of the United States, and what are the limits to which it can push for political reasons, geopolitical reasons, all of that. The second part of that question is how much is India's capacity to actually execute on some of these things? I think we don't talk about it a lot, but the COVID surge in March in India and the way the Indian government dealt with COVID, and particularly the effect of 2 million, 10 million Indian Americans watching their family members in India suffer, I think that had a bigger effect on what people view as India's capability from a U.S. perspective than we realize. So I think the question being asked also is, yes, you want to participate on COVID, climate change. Yes, you want to be a global partner in terms of vaccine development and promotion. But what are you really able to do, and how much can we really rely on India as a partner to execute at these levels? So I think that's the broader context from a Washington perspective about India. And then obviously these details about Quad, about COVAX, the UN, all that come into play. But the context is, how far will India go as a partner, and what is it capable of doing as a partner based on its own requirements, its own political issues?
Ambassador Schaefer, let's talk a little bit about Afghanistan. The American pullout from Afghanistan has hit India profoundly at so many levels, at a security standpoint, from the standpoint of people in Afghanistan, many of whom have come to our country. The fact that we've, as a relatively poor nation, or as still very much a developing nation, the fact that we put in upwards of $3 billion into Afghanistan, which may effectively evaporate. And yet, we stand with the United States. What can India realistically expect from the United States? From a security standpoint, we have huge concerns, Pakistan, China, and of course Afghanistan as well. Where would you see that going?
I think the Indian-U.S. security relationship is going to continue to be very important. The most active part of that is the China dimension, where I think we share very similar perceptions about China. Starting with the proposition that neither country wants to see a single country be dominant in East Asia and Southeast Asia. As far as Afghanistan is concerned, the big question is to what extent things will settle down there. Afghanistan will be, in a meaningful sense, governed and will be able to, assuming it wants to, resist the presence of terrorist groups on its soil. I must confess to being fairly pessimistic about that because I question the interest of the Taliban government in doing that, and I question their capacity even more.
Yep.
What the U.S. seems to be doing is trying to put in place a combination of broad international pressure and a over-the-horizon capacity to respond to provocations from Afghanistan.
Yep.
I would assume that at some level this is something that will be discussed between the United States and India, probably primarily at a more operational level so that the Indian authorities and security officials have a more granular perspective of what the U.S. can do and what it plans to do.
Right. Suhasini, there was also that rather pointed reference from the US Vice President on the importance of America and India protecting democratic institutions and democracy at a time when that is challenged. Vice President Harris being the third senior American leader to actually point that out. There was the US Secretary of Defense, there was the Secretary of State, and now the Vice President. She looked at Prime Minister Modi, made that point. Of course, India's reaction to that is that, oh, that's positive. That's great, because we are a democracy and we believe in, but there is an underlying message there, right?
Well, I think the Indian government has learned to deal with these statements on democracy, whether they're meant as a barb or whether they're meant as a statement on shared challenges between India and the US. The truth is that the US government has practically always made some kind of noises about democracy, about human rights, about the treatment of NGOs, about the treatment of the media. I think the government here is beginning to take them less and less seriously, to be honest, because it seems as if the US government needs to tick a box. Now, the truth is that the Democratic government is visibly more interested in promoting the cause of democracy. Mr. Biden has a democracy summit coming up. But essentially, what we're seeing is the US makes the point and checks that box and says that they have raised the issue of democracy. I think in the broader context, Vishnu, we have to move on from this question. I mean, in February this year, Myanmar's junta overthrew the democratically elected government, put everyone, including a Nobel Peace Laureate, in jail. That's been since February to, more than 6 months later. We don't really see anyone in the international community doing much to change that. So at some level, we have to accept that the subject will be raised, and it is for the government to answer questions inside India about the state of Indian democracy, about all these issues like human rights, and not really to worry about what they have to reply to the US government when it raises these issues.
All right, well, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to continue looking very closely at this visit of Prime Minister Modi to the United States. We'll take a short break. Before that, this first image of President Biden and Prime Minister Modi meeting inside the White House. That meeting started approximately 25 minutes back, and should go on for a bit. After that, the all-important meeting of Quad leaders. We're going to be joined by a fantastic panel this evening. Do stay tuned for a lot more.
The top-ranked...
Hello and welcome to a special show, Coronavirus Facts versus Myths. We will talk to experts in India and around the world to help us all debunk the dangerous rumors and lies that are being spread.
First minor symptom, from there you start your countdown. On the 5th day, and the only medicine that work at this stage, steroids and the anticoagulants.
General strategy as a public health professional should be, we stay prepared for the nth wave till a large fraction of the country is vaccinated.
No vaccine is going to be 100%. Even if it's 70%, 80%, 90%, that's the best alternative you have.
Weekdays at 1:30 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. on NDTV 24/7.
FIR, a show on which we don't just ask the questions, we decode the news for you and bring you the answers. What are these steroids? Do's and don'ts you must know. Why do reinfections really happen? We mystify for you this entire phenomena of antibodies. We take you through what is technically known as proning. jobs in demand in 2021. Top 10 trends. Decoding the Bitcoin.
You don't have to buy an entire Bitcoin. You could buy Bitcoin worth just 500 rupees.
Watch for your information with me, Sonal Mehrotra Kapoor, weekdays at 6:30 on NDTV.
A validation of what's been very tough months of journalism during a pandemic.
Third wave is inevitable and it's basically based on human behavior.
The interval between doses for the mRNA should be 3 weeks for the Pfizer and 4 weeks for the Moderna.
Some unknown person donated blood and saved my family member's life.
There's really no words to express the grief, solidarity.
Reuters Institute of Journalism survey at the University of Oxford, NDTV was the #1 choice for television and online audiences. Thank you all so very much.
Legacy is often seen as a burden of expectations. It comes with its own set of challenges. The challenge to take it forward, challenge to reimagine, challenge to be in the present, and also challenge to think about the future.
What accountability are you talking about?
As long as the core values and principles remain uncompromised. Debates are essential not just for journalism but for humanity. It ignites our mind, opens it up for counter-opinion, to hear all views, opinion of all hues. Which is why the oldest running debate show on Indian news television is not 21 years old, but it is young at 21. So let us begin the big fight.
We live in a time when post-truth has replaced truth, when alternate facts have replaced facts, when fake news has replaced real news. On Reality Check, we debunk propaganda. We separate fact from fiction. We expose falsehoods. We hold power to account. Watch Reality Check weekdays at 8:30 p.m. with me, Srinivasan Jain, on NDTV 24/7.
At a time when our world changed in an unimaginable way, at a time when billions faced an unprecedented global calamity, when hope seemed to disappear and new challenges emerged, we were there to bring you the story of survival, of despair, and sometimes of hope. Left, right, and center, this is no ordinary talk shop. We debate the issues that matter to you. Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. on NDTV 24/7.
From bartering to cash and coins to digital transactions, money is evolving. The way we make money is evolving. And now it's time to go crypto crazy. But can you shop online using crypto? Can you invest in crypto? Is it even legal? Well, we are here to bring you all the answers and decrypt the world of cryptocurrency for you. Come be part of this next-gen revolution. Join me, Sonal Mehrotra Kapoor, for some coffee and crypto.
Good evening. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is meeting the US President as we speak at the White House. This is the first in-person meeting between the two leaders after Mr. Biden became president in January. Prime Minister Modi is also attending the Quad Summit tonight. After his bilateral talks with Mr. Biden, Prime Minister Modi is attending the first in-person Quad Summit hosted by the US President, the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison, and Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga are also attending. The Quad Summit aims to boost cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region amidst China's growing dominance in the area. The Quad nations, Australia, India, Japan, and the US, will announce a new working group on space, a supply chain initiative, and a 5G diversification effort, apart from discussing issues like challenges in the Indo-Pacific, climate change, and the COVID-19 pandemic. But let's just bring you a couple of images. Let's go full screen on this video of Prime Minister Modi entering the White House, and then this meeting the US President Joe Biden, his first in-person meeting with the US President. They have spoken on the phone earlier on. There was a meeting with the US Vice President Kamala Harris in Washington prior to this yesterday. But this is an all-important meeting, perhaps something that will give direction to the Indo-US relationship. In just the last little while, we've seen a couple of important tweets which have come in, both from Kamala Harris and from President Biden as well. So let's just take a look at what Biden has said. He says, this morning, I'm hosting Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Let's have that tweet up if we can. This morning, I'm hosting Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the White House for a bilateral meeting. I look forward to strengthening the deep ties between our two nations, working to uphold a free and open Indo-Pacific and tackling everything from COVID-19 to climate change. And we've also had a tweet from Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States, in just the last little while, where she said, so that's actually what Biden said, but I'm just going to read out what Kamala Harris has said. I met with Prime Minister Modi to reaffirm the strategic partnership between the United States and India. Working together, we can make progress on important global issues, from the COVID-19 pandemic to the climate crisis to strengthening and defending democracy. That's what Kamala Harris has also tweeted in just the last little while. But before we start our conversations with some incredible experts looking at the Indo-US equation, also the Quad formation and that important Quad meeting that's up next, let's bring you a story of what this visit and this meeting between Biden and Modi is really about.
आपका उपराष्ट्रपति के नाते चुने जाना अपने आप में एक बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण घटना है, ऐतिहासिक घटना है.
India, of course, is a very important partner to the United States. Throughout our history, our nations have worked together, have stood together to make our world a safer and stronger world.
A much-anticipated meeting between a US Vice President who has proudly acknowledged her Indian roots and India's Prime Minister, the first such meeting since Harris took over. For India, the big takeaways of the meeting were conversations on the role of Pakistan and terrorism.
The Vice President suo motu referred to Pakistan's role in that regard, and on the need to rein in and closely monitor Pakistan's support for such terrorist groups.
Significantly, the US Vice President also reiterated the overriding priority of her administration, the protection of democratic values and institutions. She is the third senior US leader to have made this reference in talks with India since the Biden administration took over. India interprets this as a positive mention.
As democracies around the world are under threat, it is imperative that we defend democratic principles and institutions within our respective countries and around the world.
The Vice President, I think, appreciated the fact that both of our countries represented large and successful democracies, and that we needed to continue to work not only within our own countries but with other countries to promote the brand of democracy.
The focus now shifts to the big meetings today. The first bilateral between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi, and the Quad summit, where leaders of the US, Japan, India and Australia will meet. The meeting with the Quad comes just days after the UK, Australia and the US formed a security pact in the Asia-Pacific region with an eye on China. The key question, does that take away from the relevance of the Quad as a grouping? Ankita Mukherjee for NDTV.
Well, joining us, Patsy Virakuswara. She's the White House Bureau Chief of Voice of America. Thank you very much, Patsy, for being with us. What's on the agenda of the talks between India and the United States?
Well, I think the report that was played recently by you and your station lays it out quite well. You know, this is climate change. This is COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, there's going to be some questions about deliverables coming out of the Quad summit in terms of India's production of vaccines with the financial backing of the U.S. as well as Japan, and a host of other issues, including cooperation between the U.S. and India on space, as well as securing semiconductor supply chain. So these are big issues that would deepen the relationship between the two countries. Right now, the two leaders are actually still meeting about 150 meters away from me on my left at the Oval Office. At the opening of the meeting, the President Biden said that he's looking forward to deepening the relationship, and he also mentioned the special connection due to his vice president's heritage. As you know, Kamala Harris has Indian heritage. So the meeting is still ongoing. We'll see what comes out of the meeting, but certainly this is an important partnership. This is very much underlined by White House officials that I've spoken to, that they do see this. They do see India as a strong partner in terms particularly of containing China in the Indo-Pacific region, as well as holding stability post-U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan.
And yet, Patsy, while India and the United States at some level discuss China and the challenge, there's also this new formation between the United Kingdom, Australia and the United States. And it's all in the Asia Pacific, and yet very distinct and different formations. So how does the US manage that? What should we make of that?
Yeah, so this issue was raised yesterday in a briefing by a senior administration official previewing the Quad Summit. And that exact question was asked, how does AUKUS, this cooperation between the UK, US, as well as Australia, how does that play a role in the Quad Summit? How does it impact the two dynamics between the two groupings? And the senior administration officials say that these are two completely separate things. I mean, for one, the Quad Summit is an informal greeting. It's not a military alliance. It's more about economic cooperation, deepening and strengthening relationship, while the AUKUS deal is more about supporting Australia with nuclear-powered submarines at a price of U.S. and French relationship, as we know that the White House is now trying to manage some hurt feelings from President Macron's government over this deal. So these are two separate things. I think overall you can say that the U.S. is just trying to put its eggs in as many baskets as possible in terms of regional grouping, in terms of strengthening its presence and its partnerships in the region.
Right, Patsy, thank you very much for being with us and sharing a little bit of an insight on what's happening 150 meters away from you. Let's see what happens in a little while from now. We're joined by two very, very special guests. Ambassador Kenneth Ian Juster, the former United States Ambassador to India, joins us. We're also joined by William Cohen, the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Cohen Group, the former Secretary of Defense of the United States, both of whom have followed the equation, the relationship with India very, very closely indeed. Secretary Cohen, let me come to you first, sir. India obviously feels the United States departure from Afghanistan perhaps more than most other nations. There is a big vacuum as far as India is concerned. Do you believe that President Biden will or he should reassure India with specific security assurances linked to Pakistan after America's departure from Afghanistan?
Well, I think he should, and I believe he will. I think the United States has to reassure India that Pakistan is not going to become a haven for those moving back and forth between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and thereby pose a problem to all of the countries in the region and the United States on a long-term basis. So I think it has sent a signal the way in which we exited Afghanistan, and the fact that we didn't anticipate that the government would collapse so quickly. I think that sent a signal that India's security was in fact impacted. And so I think that President Biden is going to do everything in his power to reassure India that we will take India's concerns into a consideration, because there are concerns as well, ultimately.
Ambassador Juster, what really is the point of the Quad now, given the fact that you've got this new equation, AUKUS, the United Kingdom, Australia, and the United States, and that is more sharp-ended and more pointed when it comes to dealing with the physical threat of China. Does India, or for that matter, the United States, require a Quad to be discussing vaccines and climate change?
Well, let me put some of these developments in context. The bilateral meeting that's happening today in person with President Biden and Prime Minister Modi on the heels of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and somewhat chaotic conditions and perception that created, on the heels of the announcement of the Australia-UK-US enhanced defense partnership and the making of nuclear submarines. And I would add the Quad and the recent announcement by China that it's seeking to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership. These are all independent but interrelated, in some cases complementary measures that are occurring in the Indo-Pacific region, which is fast becoming the most dynamic area of the world and the center of gravity of international affairs, yet the tectonic plates of stability are moving. And what's happening is the United States, India, and other countries are trying to construct a new architecture for a free and open Indo-Pacific. The Quad is meant to try to build habits of cooperation among 4 democracies in the region, working across a set of issues that will continue to expand and to deepen, and they'll also work at times with other countries outside of the Quad. But India primarily, but maybe some of the others, has not wanted the Quad to be explicitly involved in military activities because India, which is in a different geographical position than the others because it has a long land border with the Chinese, does not want to be provocative of China in a way that might cause and lead to a military confrontation. At the same time, I believe it welcomes the AUKUS relationship in which the United States and the UK, which have the only 2 countries that share together the nuclear technology, will now bring Australia into that equation. So they're different initiatives, but they're complementary and interrelated and part of the broader effort to construct an architecture in the region.
Secretary Cohen, does this perhaps have also to do with the US reluctance to share military nuclear technology with India? It has come up in talks and it's never really progressed. And, you know, obviously there is that reluctance as far as sharing that sort of technology with Japan is, you know, that's also a factor. And therefore, Japan and India not part of AUKUS. Do you believe that the underlying basis of AUKUS is the transfer of military nuclear technology?
Well, we have, in fact, provided civilian nuclear technology in working with India, and that started back with both the Clinton administration working through the Bush administration all the way through. So in terms of looking at India's civilian nuclear capabilities and needs, the United States has been quite supportive. With respect to whether or not we would supply nuclear.
और उसके बाद भारत की प्रेस के लोगों ने मुझसे पूछा कि क्या मेरे कोई अपने किए गए मेरे कोई रिश्तेदार भारत में हैं?
I said, I'm not sure, but when I was elected as a 29-year-old kid in 1972, before I was sworn in, I got a letter from a person named Biden, last name, in Mumbai, from Mumbai.
तो मैंने कहा कि मुझे मालूम नहीं, लेकिन जब मैं 29 साल का था और 1972 की बात है, उस समय जब मेरी समय पर मेरी जब कसम उठानी थी, उस समय मुझे किसी व्यक्ति ने खत भेजा था, उसका उन्होंने कहा कि मेरा नाम भी आखिरी नाम बाइडेन है, मैं भारत से थे.
And I said, but I never was able to follow up.
वो मैं फिर बाद में ढूंढ नहीं पाया.
Next morning I had a press conference going away, and the Indian press said, someone spoke to us, you have 5 Bidens in India.
और अगले दिन जब प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस हुई तो इंडियन प्रेस ने मुझे बताया कि आपके यहाँ अब 5 लोग हैं जो उनका आखिरी नाम बाइडेन है.
And although we never admitted it jokingly, that I found out that there was a Captain George Biden who was a captain of the East Indian Tea Company.
और मजाक नहीं, मैंने कहा कि हाँ एक जॉर्ज बाइडेन थे जो कि इंडियन टी कंपनी में कैप्टन थे.
That's hard for an Irish to admit.
ये थोड़ा मुश्किल होता है किसी भी आयरिश व्यक्ति के लिए मानना.
I shouldn't be so casual. I hope you understand the humor here. And the end result was that he apparently stayed and married an Indian woman. And I've never been able to track it down. So the whole purpose of this meeting is to help me figure out.
तो मैं थोड़ा अनौपचारिक कह रहा हूँ कि उन्होंने कहा कि उन्होंने किसी भारतीय मूल की महिला से शादी की थी और उसको ढूंढ नहीं पाया था, तो मुझे आशा है कि एक दिन हम उसका पता लगाएंगे.
But all kidding aside, I think that the relationship between India and the United States, the largest democracies in the world, is destined to be stronger closer and tighter, and I think it can benefit the whole world.
लेकिन फिर भी मैं ये कहूँगा कि भारत और अमेरिका के बीच में जो संबंध हैं, हम दोनों सबसे बड़े लोकतंत्र हैं पूरे विश्व में, इन्हें और ज्यादा मजबूत होना है और ज्यादा करीब होना है और एक दूसरे के साथ रहना है.
And I think that's begun to come to pass. And today, we're launching a new chapter in the history of U.S.-India ties and taking on some of the toughest challenges we faced together, starting with a shared commitment to ending the COVID pandemic.
तो ऐसा हुआ है और आज हम एक नया अध्याय शुरू कर रहे हैं भारत और अमेरिका के बीच में, और उसका पहला काम है कि हम इस बड़ी महामारी कोविड-19 को समाप्त करने के लिए वचनबद्धता व्यक्त कर रहे हैं.
The Prime Minister and I were going to be talking today about what more we can do to fight COVID-19, take on the climate challenges that the world face, and ensure stability in Indo-Pacific, including with our own Quad partners.
तो आज प्रधानमंत्री और मैं इस बारे में बात करेंगे किस तरह से कोविड महामारी को दूर किया जाए और किस तरह से जलवायु संकट जो बना हुआ है उसको हम निपट सकें और इंडो पैसिफिक में किस तरह से हम अपने आप को सुरक्षित बना सकें.
Of course, our partnership is more than just what we do. It's about who we are. It's rooted in our shared responsibility to uphold democratic values, our joint commitment to diversity, and it's about family ties, including 4 million Indian Americans who make the United States stronger every single day.
हमारी जो आपस में पार्टनरशिप है, जो हमारी सहभागिता है, इससे कहीं ज्यादा है. हम जानते हैं कि हम लोग कौन हैं और हम चाहते हैं कि इसमें एक विविधता हो, एक हमारे आपस में पारिवारिक संबंध है, क्योंकि 4 मिलियन भारतीय मूल के लोग हैं जो यहाँ पर हमें हमारे देश को ज्यादा सुदृढ़ और ज्यादा मजबूत बनाते हैं.
As the world celebrates Mahatma Gandhi's birthday next week, we're all reminded that his message of non-violence, respect, tolerance matters today maybe more than it ever has. And so I'm looking forward to my discussions with the Prime Minister. Thank you.
और अगले सप्ताह जब हम महात्मा गांधी जी का जन्मतिथि मनाएंगे, उस समय पर हमें याद रखना है कि उनके जो बताए हुए मूल्य थे, अहिंसा, लोगों के साथ सहिष्णुता और आदर, ये आज के विश्व में पहले से कहीं ज्यादा की जरूरत है. और प्रधानमंत्री जी हम आपके साथ बातचीत करने के लिए आगे आगे धन्यवाद.
राष्ट्रपति जी, सबसे पहले तो मैं मैत्रीपूर्ण और गर्मजोशी भरा हम सबका भारतीय डेलीगेशन का स्वागत करने के लिए मैं आपका हृदय से बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ.
First of all, Mr. President, I would like to express my gratitude for this very warm welcome, full of friendship, not only to me but to my delegation.
2016 में और 2014 में मुझे आपसे विस्तार से बात करने का मौका मिला और उस समय आपने भारत अमेरिका के संबंधों में आपका जो विजन है, जिसको आपने शब्दबद्ध किया था, वो वाकई बहुत ही प्रेरक था. और आज आप राष्ट्रपति के रूप में उस विजन को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए जो पुरुषार्थ कर रहे हैं, प्रयास कर रहे हैं, इनिशिएटिव ले रहे हैं, इसका मैं स्वागत करता हूँ.
Mr. President, in 2016 and even before that, in 2014, we had an opportunity to have discussions in detail. And at that time, Mr. President, you had laid out your vision for the relations between India and the United States, and you had enunciated that in great detail. And really, that was a vision that was inspirational. And today, Mr. President, as President, you are making all efforts and taking initiatives to implement that vision, and I warmly welcome that.
आपने भारत में बाइडेन सरनेम के लोगों के संबंधों का बड़ा डिटेल में जिक्र किया. आपने मेरे साथ भी इस बात को उल्लेख किया था. बाद में मैंने काफी कुछ कागजात खोजने की कोशिश की है. कागजात में लेकर के भी आया हूँ. हो सकता है शायद इसमें तो कुछ आगे का निकल आए, शायद आपको कुछ काम आए.
Mr. President, you have spoken in detail about the burden, the Biden surname in India, and in fact you had mentioned that to me earlier too. Well, after you mentioned it to me, I hunted for documents, and today I have brought along some documents. Maybe we'll be able to take this matter forward, and maybe those documents would be of use to you.
Are we related?
Yes. Excellency, आज की हमारी ये बायोलेटरल समिट, लेकिन मैं देख रहा हूं कि ये दशक 21वीं शताब्दी के तीसरे दशक का ये पहला वर्ष, मैं पूरे दशक की तरफ देख रहा हूं कि आपके नेतृत्व में जो बीज हम बोएंगे, इस पूरा दशक हमारी दृष्टि से बहुत ही भारत और अमेरिका के संबंध में, विश्व के लोकतांत्रिक देशों के लिए एक बहुत ही ट्रांसफॉर्मेटिव ये कालखंड रहेगा, ऐसा मेरा विश्वास है।
Mr. President, I firmly believe that in our summit talks and summit meeting today, what I see is that this is the third decade of the 21st century. This is the first year of the third decade. And I see that when I look at the entire decade, I find that under your leadership, the seeds have been sown for the Indo-Us relations to expand, and for all democratic countries in the world, this is going to be a transformative period. I can see that very clearly.
जब भारत और अमेरिका के संबंधों में मैं ट्रांसफॉर्मेटिव देख रहा हूं, तब मैं देख रहा हूं कि ट्रेडिशन, लोकतांत्रिक परंपराओं और मूल्यों को लेकर के जो हम जी रहे हैं और जिसके प्रति हम समर्पित हैं, हम कमिटेड हैं, वो ट्रेडिशन का अपना एक महात्म्य और अधिक बढ़ेगा।
And this is when I see that this transformative period is in Indo-US relations. And when I talk about traditions, I'm talking about democratic traditions, democratic values, traditions to which both our countries are committed. And I find that importance of these traditions will only increase further.
उसी प्रकार से आपने उल्लेख किया 4 मिलियन से अधिक लोग भारत के अमेरिका की विकास यात्रा में सहभागी हैं। ये दशक में टैलेंट का अपना एक महत्व है। पीपल टू पीपल, ये टैलेंट इस दशक में बहुत ही प्रभावी भूमिका अदा करेगा और भारत की टैलेंट अमेरिका की विकास यात्रा में पूरी तरह सहभागी होती चली जाए, उसमें आपका योगदान बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है।
In a similar vein, Mr. President, you mentioned the more than 4 million Indian Americans who are participating in the journey of progress of America. And when I look at the importance of this decade and the role that is going to be played by this talent of the Indian Americans, I find that this people-to-people talent will play a greater role, and Indian talent will be a full partner in this relationship, and I see that your contribution is going to be very important in this.
उसी प्रकार से दुनिया में सबसे ज्यादा ड्राइविंग फोर्स बन रही है टेक्नोलॉजी। इस दशक में भारत और अमेरिका के रिश्तों में टेक्नोलॉजी, और वो भी पूरी मानवता के लिए उपयोगी हो, उस दिशा में हमारी टैलेंट टेक्नोलॉजी को माध्यम से बहुत बड़ी सेवा कर सकती है और एक बड़ा अवसर हमें उपलब्ध होगा।
Mr. President, in similar lines, the most important driving force in the world today would be that of technology, and the technology that is going to be for the service and for the use of humanity. And I find that opportunities for this are going to be tremendous.
उसी प्रकार से भारत और अमेरिका के बीच ट्रेड का अपना महत्व है और इस दशक में ट्रेड के क्षेत्र में भी हम एक दूसरे को काफी पूरक हो सकते हैं। बहुत सी चीजें हैं जो अमेरिका पास है जो भारत को जरूरत है, बहुत सी चीजें भारत के पास है जो अमेरिका के काम आ सकती हैं। तो ट्रेड भी इस दशक का एक बहुत बड़ा क्षेत्र रहेगा।
Similarly, Mr. President, between India and the United States, trade will continue to assume importance, and we find that the trade between our two countries are actually complementary. There are things that you have and there are things that we have, and then we in fact complement each other. And I find that in the area of trade during this decade, that is also going to be tremendously important.
मिस्टर प्रेसिडेंट, आपने अभी 2 अक्टूबर महात्मा गांधी की जन्म जयंती का उल्लेख किया। महात्मा गांधी ट्रस्टीशिप की बात करते थे। ये दशक उस ट्रस्टीशिप के लिए भी बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है। महात्मा गांधी हमेशा इस बात की वकालत करते थे कि प्लेनेट के हम ट्रस्टी हैं और हमने हमारी आने वाली पीढ़ियों को एक ट्रस्टी के रूप में ये प्लेनेट को हमने सुपुर्द करना होगा। और ये ट्रस्टीशिप की भावना भी भारत और अमेरिका के बीच के संबंधों में एक बहुत अहमियत रखेगा और महात्मा गांधी के आदर्शों की पूर्ति के लिए ये ट्रस्टीशिप का सिद्धांत जो प्लेनेट के लिए हर नागरिक की जिम्मेवारी विश्व के लिए बनती जा रही है।
Mr. President, you just mentioned that on the 2nd of October we will be celebrating the birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. And Mahatma Gandhi always used to talk about the principle of trusteeship of the planet. And this decade, Mr. President, from that point of view, is also going to be important as this entire principle of trusteeship. It means that the planet that we have to bequeath it to the following generations. And this sentiment of trusteeship is going to assume more and more importance globally, but also between the relations between India and the United States. And it is these ideals that Mahatma Gandhi espoused, where he talked about trusteeship of the planet and where the responsibility of global citizens is only going to go up.
और राष्ट्रपति जी जैसे कि विषयों का आपने उल्लेख किया, ये सारे विषय बहुत महत्वपूर्ण हैं, भारत के लिए भी महत्वपूर्ण है। और आपने पदभार संभालने के बाद चाहे कोविड हो, क्लाइमेट हो या क्वाड हो, हर एक में एक बहुत ही यूनिक इनिशिएटिव लिया है। और मैं समझता हूँ ये यूनिवर्सिटी, ये जो आपका इनिशिएटिव है, आने वाले दिनों में बहुत बड़ा प्रभाव पैदा करेगा। और मुझे विश्वास है कि आज की हमारी बातचीत में भी इन सारे विषयों को हम विस्तार से विचार विमर्श करके हम कैसे साथ कर सकते हैं, हम एक दूसरे के लिए भी और दोनों मिलकर दुनिया के लिए भी क्या कुछ पॉजिटिव कर सकते हैं। मुझे विश्वास है कि आपके नेतृत्व में आज की चर्चा बहुत सार्थक रहेगी।
Mr. President, you mentioned very important issues, and after assuming charge as President of the United States, you have taken very unique initiatives, whether that be COVID-19, climate change, or even Quad. And in the days after that, after taking this initiative, you have made and deployed great efforts to bring them to implement your vision. And also today we have this opportunity to discuss all these issues in great detail. And after our discussions, we will look towards how we can work further together, not only for our respective countries, but for the entire world, how we can take positive action. And I am I'm absolutely convinced that under your leadership, whatever we do, it will be extremely relevant for the entire world.
राष्ट्रपति जी, मैं फिर से एक बार आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद करता हूँ इस गर्मजोशी भरे स्वागत के लिए।
Once again, Mr. President, let me thank you profusely for this very warm welcome.
Mr. President, when will vaccine deliveries under the Quad initiative start? When will vaccine
A lot of important messages, an impromptu press conference, well, not a press conference, but certainly a couple of very important remarks by the US President and Prime Minister Modi as well. President Biden speaking about the relationship being on an upswing, a shared commitment in fighting COVID, the importance of dealing with climate change, the security challenge in the Asia Pacific, and repeating what Kamala Harris had said earlier on, the US Vice President, when he spoke about the importance of democratic values, diversity, tolerance and non-violence being so important, matters more now than perhaps ever, he said. And he also spoke of Mahatma Gandhi. The Prime Minister thanked the US President for a warm welcome. He recalled their interactions in 2014 and 2016. He said that time you had shared your visions for ties between India and America. I'm glad to see you are working to realize this vision. Today's bilateral summit is important. We are meeting at the start of the third decade of the century. Your leadership will certainly play an important role in how this decade is shaped. The seeds have been sown for an even stronger friendship between India and the United States. This decade, the Prime Minister said, will be shaped by talent and people-to-people linkages. I'm glad the Indian diaspora is making an active contribution towards America's progress. We're going to take a short break, come back with a lot more. But before we do that, a quick look at a question which we posed on Cool. Let's have that question up on the screen. Will the formation of the US, Australia, UK Security Pact promote peace in the area, or is it in fact going to result? Let's just have that question again. Just bring that question up again. I'm just trying to read that question. Will the formation of the UK, Australia, US Security Pact promote some stability in the Indo-Pacific and support their shared value and interest? Well, people have got their response. They've said, will the UK and the US help Australia acquire nuclear-powered submarines in a bid to counter China's growing power in the strategically vital region? But we're going to take a short break. There's a lot more coming up.
Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. So now we just... Good morning.
Good evening. It's 8 o'clock. You're watching NDTV for the news that matters, the news you trust. You said in this report that this crisis, like no other, will have a recovery like no other.
This is a crisis, it's a global crisis that's not going to be solved locally.
When we talk of a digital health mission in a country like India, where there are so many different standards of access, how do you actually look at that?
Digital divide does not mean having a device in everybody's hands. So you have to design it for universality, even when you're using a digital backbone.
Priya, for you, when you had stood in the dock, as it were, when you gave your defense, and you said, my only defense is the truth.
Absolutely. And I feel that sexual harassment at the workplace has got the attention it deserves.
NDTV, the news that matters, the news you need, at 8 o'clock.
Only on NDTV 24/7.
Hello and welcome to a special show, Coronavirus Facts versus Myths. We will talk to experts in India and around the world to help us all debunk the dangerous rumors and lies that are being spread.
First minor symptom, from there you start your countdown. On the 5th day, and the only medicine that work at this stage, steroids and the anticoagulants.
General strategy as a public health professional should be, we stay prepared for the nth wave. Till a large fraction of the country is vaccinated,
no vaccine is going to be 100%. Even if it's 70%, 80%, 90%, that's the best alternative you have.
Weekdays at 1:30 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. on NDTV 24/7.
FIR, a show on which we don't just ask the questions, we decode the news for you and bring you the answers.
What are these steroids? Do's and don'ts you must know. Why do reinfections really happen? Demystify for you this entire phenomena of antibodies. We take you through what is technically known as proning.
Jobs in demand in 2021. Top 10 trends. Decoding the Bitcoin.
You don't have to buy an entire Bitcoin. You could buy Bitcoin worth just 500 rupees.
Watch for your information with me, Sonal Mehrotra Kapoor. Weekdays at 6:30 on
Welcome back to Left, Right and Centre. We've seen something quite interesting in just the last little while. We've seen rather impromptu remarks made by Prime Minister Modi and President Biden, where they actually spoke at length. It was virtually a press conference. They didn't take too many questions, but they spoke at length on a number of issues. I'm just going to reintroduce our guests at the moment. The former US Ambassador to India, Kenneth Juster, William Cohn, also with us, and Ambassador Navtej Sarna, former Indian Ambassador to the United States. They all join us. Secretary Cohn, I interrupted you earlier on. They began this impromptu conversation. But some of the takeaways for you, that's my question. I'll tell you very briefly. I'll summarize what they've said. Did President Biden, he spoke about the relationship being on an upswing, a shared commitment towards fighting COVID, the challenge of climate, security challenges, but he spent some time speaking about democratic values, diversity, tolerance, of non-violence being more important than ever before, and remembering Mahatma Gandhi. So, Secretary Cohn, for you, what were some of the big takeaways of the message of the US President?
I think the nature of the relationship seemed to be very, very enthusiastic, and I didn't realize that there was a Biden that had a history in India, but now, or that he might even be related to Prime Minister Modi. I think these types of meetings are really important to establish a personal relationship. So that was the important thing. The other part of it is the recognition that we are in this, what Prime Minister Modi has called the global community. We have to be concerned about the global well-being. And I think what this relationship does and strengthens the two democracies, but also recognizes that we have areas that we really need to cooperate on. It's one thing to have a Quad, but you need to then have it operational. And it seems to me what they're doing now, they have a Quad vaccination partnership, they have a Quad climate partnership, they have a Quad critical emerging technologies partnership. So these key areas are to strengthen both democracies who work together to also help solve some of the world's problems, including, of course, climate change. So there is no one secure if any one of the countries in the world is insecure. And I used to say when I was at the Pentagon that a pandemic is only a handshake or a plane ride away. And we have seen that today, how COVID has spread globally and how we have to start thinking globally that all of us are at risk unless we work together.
Ambassador Sarna, let me just bring you in on your thoughts on the Quad and the formation of what we've seen elsewhere, the AUKUS. Where does that actually leave the Quad? We have a robust diplomatic relationship, Ambassador, with the United States for quite a few years now, more robust than ever before. Do we really need a Quad to be talking about climate, to be talking about vaccines, or dealing with humanitarian disasters?
I think the bilateral relationship stands on its own, and the Quad is an expression of what is being called flexible multilateralism, and essentially it is broadly a political message of four like-minded countries, particularly in the Indo-Pacific, particularly seeing the aggressive attitude of China. So I don't think we should mix up the bilateral relationship with the Quad. The bilateral relationship plays into the Quad, and you may have a vaccine issue between India and the US, but that helps us, that enables us to contribute to the Quad. So I'm not quite sure why you asked this question, but I think both the two things stand on their own, and the bilateral discussions today will be partly, will cover some of the issues that will be covered in the Quad, but then two countries work together at a different speed, at a different intensity than four countries working together. And then when four countries working together, they may have a larger message and they may have synergies which you can't have simply between two countries.
Yeah. Ambassador Juster, you wanted to come in? Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on that. I think it's a mistake to look at these various initiatives as zero sum or one not necessary because another exists. As I mentioned earlier, they're complementary and they build on each other. The countries in the region have enunciated principles for a free and open Indo-Pacific, but they now have to build out the architecture to support that. And the bilateral relationships are very important in doing that. The Quad is going to have an increasingly expansive agenda. It started with COVID, with disaster relief, with maritime security, with climate change, with critical emerging technologies, but it's going to go into infrastructure issues and ways to combat or to provide an alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative, to other types of areas where these countries can work together. In the bilateral relationships, they'll be talking about efforts on technology exchanges, on military cooperation, and the AUKUS, in response to a question you asked earlier, is really something that India is not asking to be part of, in my understanding, because they have a doctrine of strategic autonomy. They're not part of a military alliance. They don't seek to join that or to take an action that might be provocative relative to China, but they support this type of development in the region. And over time, I think you'll see the Quad expand. So it'll be a Quad plus other countries that might do initiatives with South Korea, with New Zealand, or even out of area countries such as the United Kingdom or France. They may include groups from outside of government, business leaders on trade issues, or technical experts, health experts, and they may also have other ways that they can work together on a deepening and broadening agenda of issues. So all of these are different pieces that relate to the broader architecture. I think one of the significant challenges that has not been adequately addressed is the economic growth in the region. And what was very interesting was after the AUKUS announcement, which was significant in part because it tends to combat the perception of the United States withdrawing from the region after the Afghanistan withdrawal, the Chinese said they want to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This poses a strategic challenge to China, to India, and the United States, which currently are not part of any regional grouping on trade. And if they let the Chinese, who are already in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, also get a nose inside the tent of the TPP, China will dominate the region economically, set the rules in terms of regulatory issues and other standards, and really diminish the ability of the United States and India to play the type of economic role they want to. So I think it's actually incumbent that the United States and India talk about themselves getting inside the TPP and trying to set the rules of the road for economic development, which has a huge strategic dimension for this region.
Yep. We're also joined by Ravi Agarwal, Managing Editor of Foreign Policy, and John Chow, Senior Fellow at the International Security Program. Let me also introduce Ajay Jain Bhutoria, the Vice Chair of the Presidential Inaugural Committee for Annual, he was key part of Biden for President 2020. Mr. Bhutoria, it seemed that, you know, what we saw in that footage, the meeting between the two leaders, it was a very casual sort of equation. Biden talking about his history, his interest in India. Is there a certain personal chemistry between the two leaders, which both are perhaps trying to really establish to take the relationship forward?
Definitely, as we saw that, and President Biden has been a strong supporter of India right from his days of vice presidency. He was the one who initiated that the trade between the two countries should reach $500 billion in next 10 years, and he also laid the foundation of cooperation in nuclear civil technologies, etc. And the relationship now is going to be more stronger because for mutual shared interest of both the countries, including national security, the cooperation is much more going to get deeper and strengthening, as President Biden said in today and in his tweet as well as in his message today. And the formation of Quad meeting will allow Delhi to develop a joint worldview with the three partners in order for countering the China's influence on the region, as well as laying a long-term foundation and for cooperation and development of shared technologies in terms of military technologies, as well as cooperation and pooling of resources to fight both the visible and invisible enemy. Visible enemy being the terrorism, and the invisible enemy being the COVID-19 and the Delta variants, etc., and being a hub for providing the vaccine to the world by 2022, where the President Biden shares a commitment for sharing the resources, financial resources, towards supporting the COVID vaccine effort, India being a major player in the world market. And this will also, this personal meeting will lead, also giving an opportunity for the two leaders to develop a personal relationship who have met after a long time, other than the virtual meetings.
Right. Ambassador Sarna, the US President also spoke about democratic values, diversity, tolerance, the importance of non-violence more than ever before. He had a message of Mahatma Gandhi, which he recalled. Prime Minister Modi also referred to Mahatma Gandhi. The US Vice President Kamala Harris also referred to the importance of diversity and democratic values. Is there a message there from the United States to India, considering that President Biden is the fourth American leader in the last couple of months who's spoken about the importance of democratic values?
Well, frankly, I think we shouldn't overread this, and we shouldn't be overly defensive. We are a democracy. The United States is a democracy, and the commonality between democracies is always talked about when leaders meet. So I think we should take it as that. And we should be, and if there are any specific issues on these aspects to be raised, I think it is by now fairly established that the US and India will talk about it as if they do amongst friends. I don't think they will be sending hidden or camouflage messages. So I think we should take it that this is talking about the commonality of democratic value. After all, we are talking about the Quad, and we are there in the Quad because we are seen as four democracies. So I think we should look at it at that.
Right. John Charles, obviously India has huge concerns with China. How important is that equation between America and India, given that China represents a concern, a very serious one for both nations?
I think China is absolutely an important issue in the US-India relationship, and it is also giving energy to the Quad that we haven't seen in some time. But I also think, going back to comments from several of the other panelists, that the US-India relationship is stronger than being about any one country, and it's not about seeking any specific outcome other than positive rules-based international order and seeking ways to collaborate between these two large historic democracies of the United States and India. The way that China factors into that, I think, is to the extent that it can be a good and positive partner, that's helpful. But in recent years, what we've seen is China taking positions that undermine U.S. competitiveness, Indian competitiveness, and more specifically to India, directly impinge on its sovereignty and its view of how India should operate as an independent country. And to the extent China continues that pattern, I think we will see increased cooperation and collaboration on security issues from the United States and India, not just on development and economics.
All right, well, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us. We need to take a short break. The other big meet which is going to be coming up is that meet of Quad leaders. But there were some interesting and important messages in that exchange between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi. We're going to take a quick look at some of the key points which they mentioned. That's coming up.
I love India.
A validation of what's been very tough months of journalism during a pandemic.
third wave is inevitable and it's basically based on human behavior.
The interval between doses for the mRNA should be 3 weeks for the Pfizer and 4 weeks for the Moderna.
Some unknown person donated blood and saved my family member's life.
There's really no words to express the grief, solidarity.
Reuters Institute of Journalism survey at the University of Oxford, NDTV was the #1 choice for television and online audiences. Thank you all so very much.
Legacy is often seen as a burden of expectations. It comes with its own set of challenges. The challenge to take it forward, challenge to reimagine, challenge to be in the present, and also challenge to think about the future.
What accountability are you talking about?
As long as the core values and principles remain uncompromised. Debates are essential not just for journalism but for humanity. It ignites our mind, opens it up for counter-opinion. To hear all views, opinion of all hues. Which is why the oldest running debate show on Indian news television is not 21 years old, but it is young at 21. So let us begin the big fight.
We live in a time when post-truth has replaced truth, when alternate facts have replaced facts, when fake news has replaced real news. On Reality Check, we debunk propaganda. We separate fact from fiction. We expose falsehoods. We hold power to account. Watch Reality Check weekdays at 8:30 p.m. with me, Srinivasan Jain, on NDTV 24/7.
At a time when our world changed in an unimaginable way, at a time when billions faced an unprecedented global calamity, welcome back. You're watching Left, Right and Centre. Just a couple of images of Prime Minister Modi meeting the US President. They've had talks. Next up on the agenda in a couple of hours from now is that meeting of Quad leaders. But both leaders spoke about the importance of the relationship, of a shared commitment in fighting COVID, the challenge of climate change, the security challenges that both countries face in the Asia-Pacific region. The US President spoke about diversity and democracy, and Mahatma Gandhi, the Prime Minister, reiterated some of those beliefs as well. It remains to be seen where this relationship is presently poised. At one level, it is extremely strong. It's a strategic relationship that's improved over the last several years. The trade relationship is strong, needs to get much stronger. But then there's the broader strategic relationship, and that needs to be seen from a bilateral standpoint. It needs to be seen from the standpoint of Quad. And it also needs to be seen perhaps in the context of AUKUS, which is a new security formation, which India is not a part of, but which is perhaps more pointed in how it deals or it looks at the China equation. We're going to take a short break. More coming up.
From bartering to cash and coins to digital transactions, money is evolving. The way we make money is evolving. And now it's time to go crypto crazy. But can you shop online using crypto? Can you invest in crypto? Is it even legal? Well, we are here to bring you all the answers and decrypt the world of cryptocurrency for you. Come be part of this next-gen revolution. Join me, Sonal Kapoor, for some coffee and crypto.
Good evening. It's 8 o'clock. You're watching NDTV for the news that matters, the news you trust. You said in this report that this crisis, like no other, will have a recovery like no other.
This is a crisis, it's a global crisis that's not going to be solved locally.
When we talk of a digital health mission in a country like India, where there are so many different standards of access, how do you actually look at that?
Digital divide does not mean having a device in everybody's hands. So you have to design it for universality, even when you're using a digital backbone.
clear for you when you had stood in the dock, as it were, when you gave your defense and you said, my only defense is the truth.
Absolutely. And I feel that sexual harassment at the workplace has got the attention it deserves.
NDTV, the news that matters, the news you need, at 8 o'clock.
Only on NDTV 24/7.
Hello and welcome to a special show, Coronavirus Facts versus Myths. We will talk to experts in India and around the world to help us all debunk the dangerous rumors and lies that are being spread.
First minor symptom, from there you start your countdown. On the 5th day, and the only medicine that work at this stage, steroids and the anticoagulants.
General strategy as a public health professional should be, we stay prepared for the nth wave till a large fraction of the country is vaccinated.
No vaccine is going to be 100%. Even if it's 70%, 80%, 90%, that's the best alternative you have.
Weekdays at 1:30 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. on NDTV 24/7.
FIR, a show on which we don't just ask the questions, we decode the news for you and bring you the answers.
What are these steroids? Do's and don'ts you must know. Why do reinfections really happen? Demystify for you this entire phenomena of antibodies. We take you through what is technically known as proning.
Jobs in demand in 2021. Top 10 trends. Decoding the Bitcoin.
You don't have to buy an entire Bitcoin. You could buy Bitcoin worth just 500 rupees.
Watch for your information with me, Sonal Mehrotra Kapoor, weekdays at 6:30 on NDTV.
A validation of what's been very tough months of journalism during a pandemic.
Third wave is inevitable and it's basically based on human behavior.
The interval between doses for the mRNA should be 3 weeks for the Pfizer and 4 weeks for the Moderna.
Some unknown person donated blood and saved my family member's life.
There's really no words to express the grief, solidarity.
Reuters Institute of Journalism survey at the University of Oxford, NDTV was the #1 choice for television and online audiences. Thank you all so very much.
Legacy is often seen as a burden of expectations. It comes with its own set of challenges. The challenge to take it forward, challenge to reimagine, challenge to be in the present, and also challenge to think about the future.
What accountability are you talking about?
As long as the core values and principles remain uncompromised. Debates are essential not just for journalism but for humanity. It ignites our mind, opens it up for counter-opinion. To hear all views, opinion of all hues. Which is why the oldest running debate show on Indian news television is not 21 years old, but it is young at 21. So let us begin the big fight.
We live in a time when post-truth has replaced truth, when alternate facts have replaced facts, when fake news has replaced real news. On Reality Check, we debunk propaganda. We separate fact from fiction. We expose falsehoods. We hold power to account. Watch Reality Check weekdays at 8:30 p.m. with me, Srinivasan Jain, on NDTV 24/7.
At a time when our world changed in an unimaginable way, at a time when billions faced an unprecedented global calamity, when hope seemed to disappear and new challenges emerged, we were there to bring you the story of survival, of despair, and sometimes of hope. Left, right, and center, this is no ordinary talk shop. We debate the issues that matter to you. Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. on NDTV 24/7.
From bartering to cash and coins to digital transactions, money is evolving. The way we make money is evolving. And First bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and US President Joe Biden. The PM Biden talks ahead of the crucial meeting of Quad leaders now. It's in a day of massive Sensex hit 60,000 amid celebration. The BSE chief tells NDTV it will not be the end of the story, just the beginning. More than 1 lakh investors in BSE daily. A 12-year-old boy also killed in Assam police firing. Photographer arrested. Questions over police's role now emerge as the Assam chief minister says it's a bit to target Assam. After Punjab, Gandhi is now focused on Mission Rajasthan. Rahul and Priyanka meet with Sachin Pilot. This on a day when Punjab CM is back in Delhi. Hours to get his cabinet okay. Horrific day of shooting in the national capital. The gangs of Delhi now shoot out in a Delhi court complex. Gangster Gogi shot by rivals in a Delhi courtroom. And Maharashtra schools to reopen finally. Schools to reopen from the 4th of October. Classes 8th to 12th in urban areas. 5th to 12th in rural areas. Hello and welcome. You're watching the 10 o'clock news. I'm Sonal Mehrotra Kapoor. Those are the headlines tonight. But tonight, really, the focus is going to be on what these two gentlemen, Prime Minister Modi and Joe Biden, are doing. What did they talk about and what the implication going to be on the relationship between the two nations as well. The first bilateral meet has happened, and the big quote coming out of there is that seeds have been sown for a stronger India-US friendship. Vishnu Som joins us now to take us through all that is happening in Washington. Vishnu.
Sonal, thank you very much for that. Well, it is a very, very important day as far as that bilateral equation between India and the United States is concerned. And also because there is that important meeting of the Quad which should be taking place in a little while from now. We have a fantastic panel with us this evening. Secretary William Cohen, somebody who's tracked the equation with India and the United States very, very closely in the past, is with us. We'll go to him in just a few moments from now. But before we actually do that and introduce our other panelists, here's a quick look at some of the key points mentioned by Prime Minister Modi and the US President at the White House less than an hour back.
2020, when I was Vice President in 2020, India
ट्रेड का अपना महत्व है और इस दशक में ट्रेड के क्षेत्र में भी हम एक दूसरे को काफी पूरक हो सकते हैं। बहुत सी चीजें हैं जो अमेरिका पास है, जो भारत को जरूरत है। बहुत सी चीजें भारत के पास है जो अमेरिका के काम आ सकती हैं। तो ट्रेड भी इस दशक का एक बहुत बड़ा क्षेत्र रहेगा।
I think that the relationship between India and the United States, the largest democracies in the world, is destined to be stronger, closer, and tighter, and I think it can benefit the whole world. And taking on some of the toughest challenges we face together, starting with a shared commitment to ending the COVID pandemic, rooted in our shared responsibility to uphold democratic values, our joint commitment to diversity, and it's about family ties, including 4 million.
All right, well, we've got some live pictures now coming in from outside the White House. Prime Minister Modi leaving after that very important bilateral meeting between India and the United States. He met the US President. He would, in a little while from now, be at the Quad Summit. So Prime Minister Modi has met the US President over the last hour or so. And the broad topics have been very clearly spelt out by both leaders. There was that informal the press engagement, which virtually turned out to be a press conference where they spoke at length about several issues and in a very candid and yet in an informal sort of setting. I just want to go back to Secretary Cohen, who's been listening in to all of the developments. Secretary, so the focus now is going to be obviously on the Quad. We're also joined by Mukesh Aghi and Lisa Curtis. But Secretary Cohen, is there a bit of a dichotomy? On the one hand, you've got the Malabar naval exercises, which India hosts, which is a quad event, very, very high level exercises. India and the US have assiduously built this up. We've seen the involvement of Japan and of Australia as well. And so that's a military sort of exercise, a very serious one. And yet there is AUKUS, which India isn't a part of, and Japan isn't a part of. Malabar is there because it's obviously got China in mind. AUKUS is there because it's obviously got China in mind. And yet all these nations are friends. How does that balance itself out?
Well, earlier, Vice President Harris said that democracies are under threat, and we are throughout the world. And whenever you have periods of instability or lack of predictability and turbulence, then it does give rise to the potential for authoritarian governments to seize power and to exercise it and spread it. And so what is important here is that democracies are strong from within. And that means we have to focus on the threats that we face as countries. We face a threat from climate, we face a threat from COVID, and we face a threat from commerce. We have to be strong in all of these areas to build our strength from within. At the same time, we have to have a military capability individually, and in some cases collectively, in order to deter other countries who may try to take advantage of us. Now, you asked earlier in terms of, is this new agreement between the British and the Australians and the US, is that contribute to more stability or instability? And I would simply say that the United States recently has been sending signals that we're pulling away out of the Middle East, from Syria, Iran, Afghanistan, and even under President Trump, he was suggesting we get out of NATO and that we pull our troops out of various places around the world. That was sending a signal that the United States was in retreat. What President Biden has done is say, no, we are internationalists. We are going to work with democracies around the world, India being the biggest, the most important, and a strategic partner for the future. And I would say the strategic relationship has been defined as the defining relationship for the United States for the 21st century. So I think all of those do complement one another rather than be seen as somehow contradictory.
Secretary Cohen, let's talk a little bit about Pakistan. And this is my final question to you. You've been very patient in taking all of these questions and being with us. You know, in India, we've been talking about Pakistan and cross-border terrorism for decades now. This is an open fact. We've seen the entire Afghanistan situation. The fact that the ISI has actually, had such a profound role in the transition over there. They continue to have a huge role. How does the US help India in dealing with this threat? That threat has never really gone away. And now we've seen what it's done in Afghanistan as well.
Well, it's become more difficult, I would say, that even though we talk about having over-the-horizon capability, that, in everyone's opinion, is certainly not as good as having people on the ground with human intelligence. I think as a result of the United States withdrawing, China has tried to move in very quickly, as has Russia, to solidify their relationship with Afghanistan and Pakistan. So I think it makes it much more complicated, but the United States is going to have to do more. And I would suggest that's one of the reasons why we work so closely and train so much on a military basis with India and with our partners in the region, because we are concerned about the role that the Pakistanis have played in allowing ISIS to go back and forth and help to destabilize Afghanistan and make it possible for Taliban to take over. So we have more work to do. It's going to be tougher, but that's the reason why we're trying to focus on that relationship and strengthen it now.
Yeah. Lisa Curtis, the next big appointment, of course, is Quad. Where do you see this summit of Quad going?
Well, this is really a historical meeting, the first time the four leaders are meeting in person together. And I think we'll see the agenda expanded. We know that 3 working groups have already been formed on emerging and critical technologies, vaccines, and climate change. But I think we can expect to see discussions expanding to education, infrastructure, cyber cooperation. And I think this is very important because it shows that the four countries are invested in this grouping, and they see it as a strategic grouping looking at long-term issues. And even though the issues are focused on the economy, on technology, health issues, that doesn't mean that these countries don't have security issues at the top of their minds. And I think the way the four countries view the Quad is a way to push back against China's increasing assertive and aggressive behavior in the South and East China Sea, on India's border, really throughout the globe. And this is a way to show that these four countries are committed to a free, open, transparent future for this region. And they're not going to allow a authoritarian, militaristic, and closed vision to prevail. And I think that's extremely important. Now, the AUKUS agreement that you were talking about earlier is a military alliance. But I think the way we should think about these two different groupings is that they're complementary, that the U.S. does need to show that it will retain a presence in this region, that it will meet the military challenges from China, and it can do this through the AUKUS, whereas the Quad is more about asserting a positive vision, asserting an alternative to China for this region. And so I think really we're starting to see the Biden administration's Indo-Pacific architecture shape up, and I think we're moving in the right direction in terms of meeting that very serious challenge that we're facing from China.
Mukesh Aghi, is it your sense that as far as the security equation, with regard to India and China is concerned, and the formation of AUKUS at the one level and the Quad and the Malabar exercises on the other, India is in a zone which India believes it's most comfortable with. In other words, a zone where we are autonomous. AUKUS would perhaps be a body which is more directly militarily aligned with the United States, necessarily so, and perhaps that's not India's comfort zone. Perhaps operating within a security realm in what Quad presently has, the Malabar exercises, perhaps a little bit more in the years to come, is as far as India presently wants to go. Is that your sense?
Well, I think AUKUS provides an opportunity for India to say that Quad is not a security alliance.
Right.
Because AUKUS is a military alliance. You have to look at it from India's perspective. What is India looking for? India is looking to improve the quality of life of its citizens. That means it needs economic prosperity, economic growth for the next 20, 30 years. That means it needs peace at the border with China and Pakistan. That means that it looks at the Quad more from an economic partnership, economic alliances, rather than a military alliances. When you look at the Quad economies, combined economy is around $33 trillion. And they are one of the most innovative economies. So India can, for example, has a trade surplus with the US, one of the few countries, whereas India imports a lot of high-tech technology from US into India itself, or partners with Japan in certain areas. So this Quad will pivot more towards economic alliances, which benefits India and the other Quad members substantially itself. It also plays into India's desire to maintain strategic autonomy, not to upset its border with China, and keep on working with the Japanese, Australian, and the Americans to drive economic growth story for India itself.
Yeah. Lisa Curtis, the final question to you. The Indo-US trade equation, we've not really spoken about that at all. Is this, time as US is India's largest trading partner to reaffirm that relationship, which has at so many levels been stuck? There have been trade disputes when President Trump was in power. Is it time to fix that and take that to the next level?
Well, like you said, the trade relationship between the US and India is very important. It's very dynamic. We have increasing links on technology trade in that sector. Of course, we have defense trade relations that will continue to grow. So this is an important relationship, but it's no secret that the U.S. would like to see the Indian market open up, some of those trade barriers lowered, and unfortunately the previous administration was unable to complete a trade deal with India. There was a lot of back and forth, a lot of effort put into the negotiations, but they didn't end up coming to a conclusion. So I think that the Biden administration may lower its expectations in terms of trying to reach a comprehensive trade agreement. What we might see is focus on particular sectors, like maybe looking particularly at a digital trade agreement, for example, and trying to work through some of the difficulties in a step-by-step process, because certainly while trade relations are strong, they could be so much stronger.
Yeah.
And we need to see those market barriers in India reduced so that the U.S.-India trade relationship can really reach its full potential.
Yeah. Secretary Cote, I must ask you, and we haven't spoken about France at all. France is an Indian Ocean power. They have territories in the Indian Ocean. They're very much a Pacific power as well. They've got territories in the Pacific region as well. They've just lost a massive submarine deal with Australia. They have a very robust military relationship with India that generates billions of dollars worth of business for them, including a deal signed today. So where does France fit into all of this?
Well, there's no question that the French are upset with the way in which this deal with Australia was handled, that they had no notice and they consider it to be a stab in the back. So they're very sensitive and should be concerned about the way in which this was handled. But ultimately, it was the Australians who decided that they wanted a nuclear power. I think we have to make sure that this is not a transfer of nuclear weapons to Australia, but nuclear power for their submarines. So that Australia saw their security more in an alliance with the United States because of our technology than with the French. So I think President Biden's going to have to work at this and in meeting with President Macron and heal some wounds. I think it's going to take some time, but it was very important that we not jeopardize this relationship with the French, because they are a key part of NATO as well. And Joe Biden, basically President Biden, is an Atlanticist in his background. He's an internationalist. And he knows the importance of maintaining strong relations. So I think there's going to be some wounds that will need some time to heal, but I'm convinced that the French will continue to work very closely with the United States and with other NATO members.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us. The focus now is going to shift to Quad, and that all-important meeting of the Prime Ministers of Australia, and India, Japan with the US President. That's coming up in a little while from now.